Hello.
How are you?
I'm doing good. Yourself?
Good. All right. Welcome to Brave Space Live, a show about anti-oppression, communal healing. And each week we pick a hard-hitting, I don't know if they're always hard-hitting, but anyway, a hard-hitting topic and dive right into the awkwardness. I'm Tychelle, a trained clinical social worker, educator, and diversity, equity, and inclusion practitioner. And this is my co-host, Mel.
I'm Mel. I'm an author, an activist, and a social ethicist. Ethicist every time. Ethicist. So this week we are welcoming a guest, Reverend Dr. Monica Joy Cross. We're going to read a short bio and then bring her on. Really looking forward to this conversation. So Reverend Dr. Monica Joy Cross, that's a lot of titles. That is so awesome.
Love it.
Serves as the pastor at First Christian Church of Oakland in Oakland, California. She is an associate minister at Tapestry Ministries, Disciple of Christ Christian Church in Berkeley, California, and director of women's ministries in the Christian Church Disciples of Christ, Northern California and Nevada. She's a Transformational Leader Fellow of the Sojourner Truth Leadership Circle of Auburn Seminary in New York City. She's the founder of the Global Prayer Network, the author of multiple books, including Reflections of a Prophet Without Honor, which is an autobiographical book of reflections that emerge from her life with God. And she is also the author of a book called Authenticity and Imagination in the Face of Oppression, which addresses gender, race, religion, sexuality, and strategies toward liberation. Monica is also on the Prophetic Council of the Poor People's Campaign and on the board of TransHeartline, a nonprofit organization that provides support for transgender people. Originally from Los Angeles, California, Monica now resides in the San Francisco Bay Area. We are so honored to have Reverend Dr. Monica Joy Cross, who has said we can call her Monica from henceforth. So let's welcome Monica onto the show. Hi, Monica.
Hi, glad to be here. Thank you.
Thank you.
Also, you use the words henceforth, Mel, and I've never heard anybody actually use that in a sentence. So just henceforth, I loved it.
Did I say henceforth?
You said we can call her Monica henceforth, and I said
yes.
I think the fanciest word I use is moreover, but I love that too.
I think I need to speak in Old English from now on, I guess. Henceforth.
Monica, we're so excited to have you and have you come talk to us and give us some knowledge about and background about who you are, what you do. And we really wanted to talk about, honestly, for me, it's talking about your life because it's so interesting. I was reading some of the articles that you've written and hearing, being a reverend, a doctor, and all of the places that you sit. So we'd love to just start with, unless you had another question, Mel, just hearing about some of your background, where you're from, kind of some of your life story and what led you to the work that you do.
Well, thank you, Tychelle and Mel. So I grew up in LA, not Louisiana, but Los Angeles. I grew up there. And, when I was a little kid, I had inklings of trans stuff. I didn't have the language for it. We're talking South Central. So it just didn't have the language.
South Central.
So I grew up, joined the Navy, went around the world for a little bit. While I did that, I started really getting deep in my faith, right? What is faith, kind of thing. And that's when the whole gender stuff really started to come out. Because I realized at that point that all the thoughts I had back in South Central were real. I just didn't have a language for it. So the more I got to know my understanding of God, the more I came out as trans. Now, by this time, I'm married with 2 kids.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah.
Wow.
Married with 2 kids in Washington, D.C., doing my thing. And I had to grapple with this whole thing. But in order for me to live my truth, I had certain things had to fall apart or come back together in a different way. So So I wound up having, it was hard. It was really, really hard. Because by that time I had gotten things squared away, you know. And also, being a black man in America is one thing. Being a black trans woman, oh my God. So I had to grapple with all of that. But what kept me going was my mother.
Mm-hmm.
My biggest cheerleader was my mother. My faith, and of course, this place called Nutty Buddies in Norfolk, Virginia.
Well, we might have to dig into what Nutty Buddies is a little bit. So you said a few things in there that made me really think about the journey that you talk about. When you went into the Navy, how old were you when you went into
I was 23.
23. And you talked about finding your faith at that time. So what kind of led you to finding your faith while in the, is it the Marines or the Navy? I don't want to get it wrong.
Navy. In the Navy.
Okay.
Navy.
I want to make sure. What led you to finding your faith while you were there?
I think of the combination. One, I've been to Desert Storm, Desert Shield. I've been to war. I've been around different places. I tell you, sometimes the spirit moves in interesting ways. And you could have a point in your life where the spirit is saying, okay, this is where we are. I don't want you to try to explain it. It's a spiritual faith move that you can't always. I don't know. I hope that makes sense. But it's like,
no, I understand what you're saying. Like, you don't always know, but you're moved in that direction.
Yeah. And it came to a head. That's why I have a mad respect when people come out, because it's not just a physical thing; it's also a spiritual thing about coming out. And if you choose not to come out, that creates other problems.
Right.
So it's best to just come out and go through the party and see what happens. But yeah.
And multiple parties at that, I would say, right? Because it's not like a one-time thing.
No, it's not.
What was it like for you to come out at that point? You said you had a family, you had kids and everything. Did you find you had a good support network at the time?
No, I'm in DC. DC is a hard-hitting place. You have different facets. Like any city, you have different facets of it. I was in the military at the time. And so everything just fell apart. I was in military housing. That fell apart. Kids, everything gone. Only thing I had left was my faith. And so there was a preacher that said you have to chew on scripture sometimes. Chew on scripture. I found out what that means. You got to chew on scripture just to make it through the day, to keep your mental health. The good thing is I was still out in the Navy. I was still able to do what I need to do. So that kept me going. Well, one thing what really got me really to know that the spirit was there is when I actually had a clearance. So I get mad when I hear knucklehead and his issues. Anyway, I had a clearance.
Security clearance? Is that's what you mean?
Security clearance, right?
For us non-military folks, yeah.
Yeah, I had a high security clearance. And I'm in TS, top secret. And I was working in a really closed, called SCIF, a secure space, right? And so I had to have, you have to go back and get re-inspected for your clearance. So the people came in, I turned my paperwork in. Everybody on my paperwork was trans. Everybody was trans and from Nutty Buddies. So,
wow.
So the inspector comes in, and she says, "Oh, tell me about all these folks on your paperwork." Well, I said, "Well, I'm trans. I say I'm gay, but I'm trans because I say gay is fine. They can work with gay. Trans, yeah, not so much." So come to find out, she had a cousin who had the surgery. So she said, "No, that's fine. We just want to make sure you can't get blackmailed." So I was trans. I was able to keep my clearance, but it just let me know how much I had to trust in the spirit as I move forward. But that was a scary time for me.
I mean, I would say I could only imagine, but I think I can't even imagine, to be honest. One of the things that you said that really moved me in, as you talk about your story, is having your mother, because we know so many trans youth of color, and trans youth in general lose family, especially when you layer on your identity, your religion on top of one another. Having your mother, if you could just speak to a little bit of what that felt like for you to have the comfort and the cheerleader, as you called it, for in your mother, because I think when I think about children and young trans youth and young black trans youth, all of those identities together, if there are parents listening, what it did for you, to help you get to where you even are today. I'd love to hear about the love of your mother and how that, resonated in your life.
Well, it's interesting. So my mother's from New Orleans, as they say, right? So she moved out to LA when I was like way in the womb somewhere. She moved to LA and she became a social worker. And her area was Hollywood, North Hollywood, Beverly Hills, those kind of places. So you're a social worker in Beverly Hills? Yep.
Yeah.
So she actually had trans folks who were part of her clients.
Mm-hmm.
So when I came out, she said, "I'm good. I just never thought of having it in my own house." But she said she was good, and she began to call me Monica like right off the bat.
Wow.
And so because she's always been my greatest supporter, because she knows the only one she wants me to do is be safe. She don't care about nothing else, just be safe. Live your life. I love you. I do what you need to do. But yeah, so she's always been there for me. Now my sister's a whole different conversation. So she's a whole different conversation, which is a whole for a later time. Anyway.
Yeah. I just think about that because when we talk about what faith means, especially the older we are, the older generations above us, when we talk about faith in our community, it is, this is the way it's supposed to be and nothing else. So the exposure of your mother being a social worker in LA was that exposure where it wasn't foreign to her. It wasn't something that she couldn't see, touch, understand. And I mean, still, even the point where you say, I'm okay with it, which is a great way to start. I just never thought it would happen in my house, because some people are okay if their child is gay or if they know somebody that's gay and trans, but when it's in their house, it's a different story.
Exactly.
Right. So having that, I think, is so important, because, often what I hear from, I mean, I have a sister and a brother who are gay, neither of them being trans, but both of them who are gay. It's this thought process of, if the outside world hates me, that's one thing. But if the person I love the most, my family, hates me, that's a different thing. That's a different beast to fight.
Yeah, it is. Yeah. And then my mother, she would, so I have cousins in New Orleans who, all LGBTQIA plus, all of them. And so she would send me news clippings of cousins who've been through this stuff. So it's almost like I said, now you tell me this, Mom, why didn't you tell me before?
Right. I didn't have the language before, but if you told me this before, maybe there'd be some language there.
Yeah. I'm a great supporter. Yeah.
So happy to hear that. How
did you get into working as an advocate for transgender issues and transgender community, like the Poor People's Campaign? That's amazing. How did you get into that? And I'd love to hear more about your work now with that campaign.
Yeah. Part of being authentic means you can't be numb to what's going on. I'm more alive now than I've ever been because of being authentic and being real. And realizing also that because I have had opportunities that a lot of my trans sisters haven't. I mean, just being real. There's a certain responsibility for me that goes with being trans. Such as, standing up in Poor People's Campaign for poverty, all kind of stuff, and particularly for the transgender community. or because I'm also a Navy vet who's trans, standing up for veterans who are trans. So I mean, there's a responsibility that goes along with it. Even when I was going through PSR and going through my little process at Pacific School of Religion, I realized it just wasn't me. I represent a whole community. Not because it's ego trip, but it's just they're not going to see certain folks in certain spaces, and sometimes you're the only one there they'll be able to see. I was blessed to be able to go to a City of Refuge, where Bishop Yvette Flunder is the pastor. I don't know if you've heard of her or not, but she gives a lot of support regarding faith and community, which also helped out a lot. Yeah, so that kind of, but yeah, it's my responsibility,
That is, I mean, and that's one of the things that I take is in the work that I do. So I do work in the area of DEI, and for me, it's a responsibility of love, right? When we talk about love, we think it's this very narrow scape. And for me, I was actually just saying this to someone that I do all of the work that I do because I love people, and especially Black women, right?
Yeah.
And this love comes with responsibility. And that's any love. If you are a parent to a child, it's love, but it's responsibility. If you, have friends or you do this work, and especially the kind of work you do, I when you said that, it really resonated me with this responsibility for the folks who are not in the room, not for you to, whether or not they are in the room, but this responsibility to, if you're going to be seen, to carry that with you. And it's not, it's not a way. And for me, and I'm just ruminating. I mean, just going through this thought process. It's not necessarily it's a weight, it's a gift. Because if I'm being seen and I can bear responsibility for people who look like me, live like me, and people who don't, then it's a gift that I get to have because somebody sees me. So exactly. I hear that you're saying.
Yeah. So like right now, so I'm the director of women's ministries for my church in our region of California. They never had a Black transgender woman to be the minister of women's ministries, ever. I'm the first one.
Right.
So within our region of 64 churches, with hundreds of women who are mainly white. Most of them are white, I'm a Black trans woman in leadership. So, I mean, how I move in the world really does determine, like, if another Black trans woman, well, how would they see her? Well, I go like this, no, we can try her. So when you're pushing, almost like, sometimes I feel like a midwife, but that's, you're pushing. But yes, I mean, the whole idea of living a decolonized life but being ethical about it. Yeah. Wow.
One of the things that you said, I wanted to relate back to a story that Mel said she wanted to tell. Just, I'm sure in the work that you do, you may be the first Black trans woman that many people have met. And you being able to live authentically in front of them will likely change how they engage with people, how they treat people, how they teach people. So Mel, if you could share that story that you talked about, I'm just so excited to hear it.
Yeah. Monica, you had an impact on my life. You really did in the way that I think about trans people. So my first year of seminary is when we had our class together. Monica and I had a class together at Pacific School of Religion. Yeah. And I come from a really white conservative background. I had very little exposure to people of color, let alone trans people of color. I didn't really even know what to think about this issue. I was kind of a baby liberal, and I didn't know. I didn't have language for a lot of these things. I didn't have training or education, and exposure. Yeah, nothing like that. So anyway, I remember Monica would walk into class every class with these beautiful dresses, her hair done, her nails done. She just was like radiantly confident, and she would raise her hand to speak and say like beautiful things. And for a few weeks into class, I remember just, I don't know, just how you carried yourself with so much radiance is the only word I can use to express it. And but one day you showed up to class looking very different. You looked like a male presenting person. All of a sudden, I even thought you were a different student. I didn't even recognize you. So anyway, at the beginning of class, Monica raises her hand and she says something to the effect of, I won't remember exactly, but something to the effect of, you might all notice that I look different today. I have I don't remember what you said, you had a meeting at maybe the VA or to I think somewhere, maybe the VA, you had to go do something work related or something like that. And you told the whole class, I didn't feel comfortable dressing like myself. So I dressed like this today so I would be safe. But I just want you all to know that that's, and I looked at your face. I looked at your face and you looked so sad.
Yeah.
You looked so sad. You looked hollow. You looked deflated. And in that moment, it completely transformed everything I thought I knew about trans people, because I knew in that moment, I was like, this is not Monica. There's a piece of her missing right now as I'm looking at her. This is not her. Her was the her I met before. This is a costume. Right. That was my first thought. And my second thought was, how courageous you must be to educate us all in that moment, given what you must have been feeling. That was so courageous. Thank you for that. And also, you shouldn't have had to do that,
Yeah, but then I had to. I mean, one thing is knowing where you live at, knowing the world in which I move, and being in the wisdom to know how to move. There's certain things, because safety is always paramount in a trans person's life. Physical safety, spiritual safety, it's all about safety. And within that discussion, you have the thing called transformation that takes place all of the time. And so when I have to go I'll do that now. I'm in a different space, but at that moment, one, I was coming out of the military. I retired military, so I retired from the military. I'm still learning myself. So how do I move with this stuff? What do I do? How do I do this? I had several incidents in San Francisco. I thought San Francisco was all at the bag of chips. No, it's not. Several verbal altercations with folks. And so I had to be careful how I move. So when it gets to the point is, it's not just about the clothes you wear or the physicality of who a person is, but it's that spiritual depth that you are. Because for me, trans spirituality is not just a physicality thing, So, but that was a space, a very tense space, a very fearful space, a space on the one hand where, people being able to see different facets of who I am, well, that's cool, but that's difficult. But at the same time, having to move in different spaces, that was a hard time, very difficult. But I couldn't be here unless I went through that. Yeah.
I just think so much about what that means to be who you are and show up as you are, and the difficulty in not just Blackness, not just womanhood, but Black trans womanhood, and having to move. And it is, when you talk about it, I can only understand a fraction of what you're talking about from my experience as a Black woman, and having to move differently, right? Having to move and be certain things in certain ways. And this is when we talk about covering, right? Like I have to cover, I have to adorn myself in many different ways so that I can, one, be alive, right? And then two, receive services that I should be due because I did a service to this country, or receive services in any, it's kind of like when you put on your white voice when you get on the phone and you go, and I did that once, and my husband asked me, he said, why did you sound like that when you were on the phone? I said, because I need a place to live and this woman has to rent to me.
Yeah.
Right. So you have to change who you are and assimilate to a culture. But I always think about that when, for me, going through school as a clinical social worker, I always, when I read the DSM and all the things that belong in there, it was really people's mental health was adapting to the world that was in front of them, and they had to change around it. So I think about so much of what you said, and putting on this cloak and then wanting to take it off to be
yeah.
who you are, to be who you are now, but getting through all of those things for you to be who you are now.
Yeah.
Wow.
Because, you know, there are certain services that I could not get being Black and trans. I mean, even if you're white and trans, you might get more services than if you're Black and trans.
Right.
Wow.
You know, if you're white and trans, you could be in Silicon Valley. If you're Black and trans, you may be on the street in San Francisco.
Right. You be on Skid Row versus
You know what I'm saying?
in the building. Exactly.
Yeah. I mean, a Tenderloin somewhere. So, I mean, it's a very different. So, knowing how to navigate the oppression that's there intentionally requires a lot of thought and a lot of strategizing. There's certain, so I'll give you a good example. So, I have friends, trans friends down south. I'm not going down there, but like, you can save money down there. It's lower cost of living in California, of course, but then you couldn't leave out the house because you're so fearful and afraid of getting hurt.
Right.
So it's always a matter of strategizing. But, you know, the strategy didn't just start with the trans folks. We've been doing this for like how long now? Right. Trying to strategize how to move through the white supremacist imagination, that kind of thing. So at PSR, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, what you talked about is even the cost of being trans is higher, right? I can't live in certain places because I can't live my life and do anything, right? Not just, you know, I can't live my life all as fabulous as I want to, but I may not be able to walk out of my door and have to my regular job in the South. So the cost of living for trans people is higher.
It's higher. I mean, you can't even get AIDS aid, you know, as far as funding and stuff for HIV and AIDS in the South. Oh no, you can't even get that. I mean, and then of course down there you also have families that when they have a child that come out as trans, oh well, they're just evil and needs exorcism. I mean, it's just that bad. You know, so at least where I am now, I can do the work I'm called to do. I can drive around Northern California, mindful of where I am, of course, you know, but it's very different. So yeah, even at PSR, I'm strategizing on how to move, and not to become too naive. I'm at PSR. You know, like the world's like PSR. I'm good.
Like not to drop your guard.
Yeah.
Do you have any thoughts on? And I know you do because we talked about it briefly before the show, but would love to get your thoughts on how people use faith as a weapon against trans and LGBTQ and people of color. I mean, I think a lot of people turn their back on faith because of that, but it's really interesting that you have run harder into faith as a refuge from those things, is what I'm hearing you say.
Yeah. So for me, I came out in the Bible Belt, right? We're talking Virginia. You know, I had a pagan therapist, wonderful pagan therapist. She was the MW pagan. She loved, you know, a tree hugger, the whole 9 yards. And through her, I actually met one of my colleagues and oldest mentor, Jonathan Thunderwood, who's a trans man, came out in a Baptist church in Virginia.
Bold.
You know, so I went all through the Native American theology experience and stuff, drumming circles and stuff, and went right back smack in the church. I'm like, what? Well, this is where you need to be because we got to help the church out. That's kind of what happened.
Okay.
Because, you know, so when you really dig down into scripture and faith, it is supposed to be about liberation and hope and peace, right? But when you have a white supremacist Christian nationalism out there, you've got to have something else to push back against it. So my work really is about educating people around progressive liberal faith, not around white supremacy and Christian nationalism. And unfortunately, the way this country is structured so that the belief system would support money, pure and simple money.
Yes.
That's not what the church is supposed to be about. That's not what the faith is supposed to be about. I mean, money and these things might be an implication of what faith is, but it's not supposed to be the center of faith. And so being able to express that, explain that, is really important. So somebody has to come in and save the church. The church needs to be saved.
That's awesome.
That's a work that you put on yourself.
I didn't want this, but this is what I've been given. I mean,
right.
one day I
called.
Say again?
So when we're called to do certain things.
Yeah, I mean, it's held in the Sojourner meeting, and I said that Melissa Harris Perry. I don't know if you heard her or not. Melissa Harris Perry.
Yeah.
She said, "You got to do what?" I was like, "That's too much. That's too much." But that's what we're called to do.
Right.
Have you had any success?
Me, but many others. Say again, Mel.
Have you had any success yet in that mission?
Yeah, some success, but it's a tall order. It's a tall order.
I'm thinking to myself, I'd love to meet some of the people you teach and see some of the things that you've taught them, right? Like the impact that you've had. It's just what I'm wondering. Like, I'd love to meet some of them. So I'll definitely be following up and being like, where is Reverend Dr. Monica Cross? Because just that pure exposure to more people, to different life, to different walks of life, different facets of life, hopefully it'll help people. And then you speak such a powerful place of understanding and liberation. I can only imagine, right? So
I'd love to ask about your books now. So you wrote two have you written 2 books?
2 books,
2 books, yeah. So one is about authenticity and imagination, is that right? In the face of depression?
Yeah.
So that one to me is quite interesting. So I'd love to hear about that. But you also wrote a second book called A Prophet Without Honor. Is that about your work working within faith systems and trying to be a prophetic voice there?
Yeah, so oh my goodness. Yeah, because being a prophetic voice in the space where it's not wanted. So when you're a prophetic voice in the midst of white supremacy, or prophetic voice in the midst of oppression, where folks don't want to hear you. They don't want to hear that. That's where that book comes from. Because, it's like stretching people. People don't like to be stretched. They don't like to think. They don't like to be stretched. Be careful about that. But that's what I and others do. We stretch them. Like, how can this be? How did you do that? Or how does that work? Even being Reverend Doctor, people was like, how did you get that? That's not supposed to happen. Well, here I am.
Well, that really, I mean, being a biblical scholar myself, that really aligns actually with the Old Testament or the Hebrew Bible. The prophets were true prophets. They were always cast outside the city and people threw rocks at them. They're like, stop talking. We don't want to hear from you anymore. Right? A true prophet does not say things that make them popular. So maybe that's a sign that you're doing the right kind of work. You're doing it right. If you, if you're really pushing people in ways that they're not ready for or don't want to be pushed, but you're doing it for the sake of liberation.
Yeah. I mean, I went to, so the disciples had called a general assembly where all of the churches come to a general assembly, like a big convention. And we're there trying to push forward gender inclusion and learning about trans stuff as a proposal for the church. And, I got up, did my little spiel, and folks were like, what? They were not happy. You got some other folks who came after me wanting to put the proposal back in the box, throw it away and stuff like that. But I said, all I could see was Black trans women being murdered.
Wow.
Wow. And you're going to put this proposal back in a box? Oh, yeah. It was, in fact, after that, it's like, my God, how'd you do that? It's just a spirit. And plus, I was so incensed that they wouldn't want a proposal that made people live and thrive. It's incensed. But yeah, so it passed. But I realized some folks don't want to. They want to hear what they're comfortable with. They don't want to hear what they're not comfortable with. Um, yeah. Anyway, yeah. So that's kind of So it was. But then if I don't do that, that's why I get mental health issues.
Right.
Interesting. So this
So
is
one
for
thing that you said about that is that in thinking about why, and when you address an assembly like that, it's not just it's about life or death for many people. There's so much that right now the church and religiosity are on the decline in many places because it's not open, because it hasn't been welcoming spaces. So how do you in your faith practice make sure you're creating and professing for welcoming space? I will say now, and I'll say it this way. Like for me, I left Christian. I did that. Everybody goes through their figuring out their religiosity at some point, right? And for me, it was around 15, 16. And I grew like my grandmother. They held service for my grandmother's birthday. Like she would answer her phone, praise the Lord. That's how she answered the phone. Like that's
Yeah.
Like when you call her house, she'd be like, praise the Lord. That's how she would do. That's how I grew up. The first time she bought me pants for Easter, my whole family was aghast. Like, she bought you pants, right? Like my grandmother's a saved woman. So for me, I started, deconstructing what it meant to be a Christian in my own life at 15, 16 years old. And for me, I just didn't find myself under the understanding and being a part of Christianity because I didn't see a place for the liberation. And when you talk about the work that you do, it sounds so inclusive and liberating. And for me, I hadn't found that. Like I always tell people I believe in God. I don't know about some of his people. I don't know about some not even the disciples, but like his believers. Like I don't know about them, but I know about God. I ain't got to worry about him. I worry about y'all. So how do you do that work in your ministry so that it is a radically inclusive and liberating space?
Well, it's interesting. So my doctorate was on radically inclusive hospitality. That's my doctorate.
Hit it on the money, Tychelle. Nice.
Radical. I mean, that's what I care about, right? Like you can't cast people away and expect them to believe in you. You have to bring them in. Right. I'm going to be looking for your doctorate and reading about radically inclusive hospitality. Wow.
That's my next book. I've got it. It's already out on the table, ready to be published. I got to send it in.
Okay. Well, then I'll wait for the book. Make sure you get some profit off of that. I'll wait for the book. But how do you, in your book, and I'm, from what you've already written, what does that look like for you? How do you do that so that it's not casting people out, but calling people in, welcoming people in?
First of all, I mean, it's those folks who come to the church, whatever the church, is not up to the church. It's not up to me or anybody. When a person shows up, whoever they are and wherever they are, you take them on in. Come on in. And you've always got a space for them already, no matter who or what they are. That's what you do. Because you realize, I realized that I won't get too religious here. Jesus came from the farthest point out at the time, right? Jesus didn't show up at the center of town. No, Jesus came from the outside. Mm-hmm. So if we're gonna follow the life of Jesus, not of white supremacy, but of Jesus, then we've got to make sure that our love at the farthest points. And when they come in and they haven't had their meds yet, or they haven't had whatever the stuff they need to have, fine, no problem. Come on in. We shouldn't have any barriers or boundaries around who comes to the church. I don't care if somebody say, well, we haven't had the training around open and affirming. That's not the point. Because the person you put out could be Jesus right there. So That's what that's about. And to some extent, I have no problem with the church losing people. I have no problem at all. Some folks don't need it. I shouldn't say that.
Well, I hear you, because sometimes people need to go out to come back in, right? Things need to, as you said in the beginning, fall apart to come back together. So if they leave the church, maybe there's always the space for you here, but go out and get yourself together and come back in, or be ready to be transformed in all of our brokenness.
Yeah, and that's what's going on in the church now. The church is being transformed. It's being changed by the Spirit. Now, what the church is going to look like down the line, I don't know. But it's not our church. It belongs to Jesus. That's the first thing, right? We're here by the grace of God in the church, whatever that church looks like for us. And so the church is going to change. Like everything else changes. Now, what that church look like on the other side, who knows? But that's what's going on right now.
So what does it look like for the American church to get rid of white supremacy? I can't even imagine what that would look like. Do you have any thoughts or advice for people who are trying to decolonize their faith?
That's some hard work.
It's not an easy one.
There are folks who are doing some work around radical inclusion when it comes to white supremacists. There are some folks who escaped from it, and they're going back to call to new consciousness for those folks. That's not my call, but that's their call. So folks are doing that work because they realize that that's not the church. That's the social clubs. That's not the church. Because when you read the teachings of Jesus, even if wherever you are, when you actually read about Jesus, it's like, wait a minute. So that's not the church? So folks are doing that work. But radical inclusion is still going on, even in that space. It just looks a little bit different.
It's funny because when I experience knowing some of the stories of the Bible or engaging with people who are Christian, I experience them as the people who cast Jesus out and not the people who were ready for it. And I feel like that, and I don't understand how people don't see that when in these spaces where they're not radically inclusive, they are those people, but they don't see themselves as that. They'll be like shouting at LGBTQ people to accept God. I'm like, do you realize that you're not, mm-hmm. you see it? Like, you know what I mean? That's how I see that.
I walked into a store out in Virginia, and a lady looked at me and said, evil, just plain evil. I'm like,
about you?
Yeah, they called me evil. I'm like, I had just come from church too. It's actually in my book, Authenticity and Imagination, about being called evil in the grocery store after I had come from church. Yeah, but the indoctrination is so deep. They had a civil war over this indoctrination. I mean, so. So our job is to somehow alleviate that indoctrination, but it's not up to us. It's up to the Spirit to do it. We just have to stay the course.
So in your book, Authenticity and the Imagination, what brought that book about? What made you want to sit down and author that book? What lives in that work for you?
Well, part it's like coming out of my own life teachings. And it's a way to say, so other folks are going through something similar, they can read that book. Oh, okay, I see how that might work. So it gives some people kind of hope. The other part is also, how do we strategize in these spaces? What does that look like to go up against transgender anti-trans legislation? What is that? How do you address that? So it's kind of those kind of things. It's kind of out of my own life in these spaces.
As we've been talking, my brain keeps going back to this idea, and I might be stealing this from a scholar. I apologize. You might actually know, Monica, who said this or what this is from, but defining marginalization as making people's bodies political. making people's bodies political, that our bodies become political, like our bodies as women, our bodies as trans women, our bodies as Black people, as whoever we are, that the only people who escape that politicization of their bodies are like straight white men, right? Everyone else has to deal with anti-trans legislation, or has to deal with people reading their bodies in a grocery store and deciding that that means something bad just by nature of who they are. And how frustrating that is, and how unfair that is, that just the way that I am in the world means that someone will seek to control me in some capacity or judge me.
Yeah. I mean, I think, Audre Lorde kind of got that to me. Audre Lorde and Bell Hooks kind of did that. Toni Morrison. It's like, but also there's a guy talking about the white gays.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. These kind of, those kind of books kind of like, oh, well, yeah, okay, that's what that's about, So while it was from very much a Black experience, not specifically trans, but you realize it's from a Black experience and what they're going through and how these different structures don't really change. It's still the same stuff. It's still the same stupid, evil stuff. They don't change. And when, so anyway, while the personal is political, when I get up in the morning to walk out the door with a Black trans woman, okay, I have to encounter police who are ignorant. I got to encounter grocery store owners who are just terrible. A lot of stuff when I walk through the day is a political concern, I mean, it would be nice not to have to think about this stuff, just to be like white guys, not have to think.
I'll say that because that's so true, because I went to and somebody asked me, do you think about being Black all the time? And I was like, there was one time I can remember not feeling that when I went to the white privilege conference, and I went and sat in the park, and I was like, "Ooh!" I just sat in the park. But other than that, it's all the time. It's everything you encounter. It's that white person that frowned at you, and the white person who smiled at you, right? Because you don't know what's behind these things. So it's so much, and I can only imagine in the privilege that I sit in as a cis woman, not having to think about certain things, right? So, yeah.
That's why I do the Poor People's Campaign work, and I do that work because it needs to be done. When you've got folks who are starving, homeless, across the spectrum, you just can't sit by and not do anything, because you realize in order to fix this problem, you have to have a voting block. So, yeah.
What for you has been the impact of a lot of the states passing anti-trans legislation? You mentioned that earlier. I wanted to make sure we circled back to it.
Well, I have a friend down in Mississippi and Alabama and Florida, different places. Some folks say, one lady said she's going to commit suicide. It was so bad.
No. Oh, yeah. My God.
And then I have one of my oldest mentors, a trans man. They're living in Texas, outside of Dallas. And these places are just as backwards as, we are our own Taliban over there. Anyway, so I was talking to my friend the other day. He goes so much stress. He's a trans man. He has so much stress, it's hard for him to enjoy life because he's always under stress. While he couldn't afford to stay here in California, so he moved to Texas. But Texas is it's cheap, but then, you can't walk outside, like I was saying. And the thing is, it was really interesting. When he moved into this place, there were crosses everywhere. Everywhere there were crosses. But at the same time, if they know who he was, those crosses would be used to hate. So that's why, yeah, it has a negative impact on me. But my only hope is in the work that I do to somehow address those issues.
So I wanted to get your thoughts on something that has been in the media as of late, shifting gears a little bit in the 10 or so minutes we have left. So in the media, and Mel, I want to hear your thoughts as well. We've been the trailer for the new live action Little Mermaid came out, and for me, it meant so much to me. So I'll tell a little story to the audience. When I grew up, there were no Black princesses. There were, in the 80s and 90s, even though I think Sleeping Beauty is the oldest one in 1953, something like that, right? So there were no princesses of color, Black princesses, until Aladdin came out. And as I was telling some of my friends this story recently, I remember going to the Scholastic Books Fair, and that's me dating myself as a 90s kid, right? Going to the Scholastic Book Fair and looking through different things. And the only thing that I had found was paper doll, Aladdin and Jasmine paper dolls. So I bought these Aladdin and Jasmine paper dolls. But I remember specifically feeling like, well, there's no Black one, so the brown one must be it, right? And even that felt distorted for me. So, and I was saying, the first time a Black princess came out was 2009 with The Princess and the Frog. And I remember distinctly, and I took a picture of it, and I'm sure it's somewhere in my Google Photos. I was walking down the street on my way to work, and there was a school on my way in the path, and there were two little Black girls with their little book bags and their character book bags, and one had Doc McStuffins, whose mother is a doctor and her dad's a stay-home dad. And her mom's a doctor, so she pretends to be a doctor to all her stuffed animals, Doc McStuffin. And one little girl had that backpack, and the other one had a Princess Tiana, Princess and the Frog backpack. And it stopped me in my breath to just see that, because they had that representation that I didn't have. And it made me so happy. So to see, this, live action princess. Now, I'm not a child, but what I had taken from so much of this was little Black girls who would see themselves. And there's just been so much backlash from people trying to, and the most ridiculous backlash, it always is ridiculous. They're like, well, what about Hans Christian Andersen and the original story of the Dutch? We're not staying, or they even go into the other one being, and this one gets me. If we were really sticking to the fact that she was a mermaid under the sea, she would not be Black because there's no sun. She'd actually be translucent. And I'm like, so I just want, and I know that, and so I wanted to get your thoughts on it too, because I know that mermaids actually have, I've heard a lot of trans people in my life and in general talk about mermaids being kind of a symbol for trans people and just how the body is different than other bodies. So I wanted to get your take on what you've seen, some of the backlash you heard, and what gives you joy or your thoughts about the new live action Little Mermaid.
Yeah, The Little Mermaid was one of the first movies I looked at when I started coming out. It's about, because it's all about authenticity and transition that the Little Mermaid really kind of wow, I feel that way. And then feeling out of place at that.
Right.
She had Triton, her dad, and stuff like that, who loved her and all, but she still felt out of place. There was a disconnect. Until she actually transitioned, and I say transition not in a heteronormative sense, but just transitioning, her transition made her feel whole again. It made her feel whole. She had to come out of the water and feel whole. So
that's her coming out story.
Yeah, so there's also a thing of rebirth, a thing of a different consciousness and different connections. Oh my goodness, yeah, that brought a little life to me, right? A lot of Nutty Buddies, but yeah, a little. And I realized that the more, so white guys don't like to be decentered. They don't like that, right?
Right.
They hate being decentered. Even when the Black Panther came out, they were mad about that. So
now they're talking about having a White Panther. I'm like, there is actually a group called the White Panthers. But yeah, decentering them. Yeah.
yeah, I mean, but that's that takes me back to Jesus. Jesus decentered the empire, and we see what happened to him. But that's beside the point.
Well, you're right. Little Mermaid, she sings, "I want to be part of that world." Like there's this desire for belonging, and I never thought about all this. It's amazing. It's true.
Oh yeah.
So I've just been grappling with so for me, and I'll say, all of this backlash has been so wild because they've like Halle Bailey has gotten death threats to be lynched because they want her not to do this movie. But for me, one of the things that grabbed me solace was, and Mel and I are students of TikTok University, is watching people film their young children watching this trailer and seeing that this princess looks like them. And I honestly, the first time I saw it, I was sitting on my couch with my husband and I cried because I didn't know how much it meant for me to see myself seeing themselves through them. So it's kind of like a simple thing. And it really has brought me, regardless of what, people will always have backlash, as you said, because people don't like to be censored. But to see these young Black girls, even there was a woman who I follow, her daughter's autistic, and even she like grabbed some meaning from it, right? Like she was like, that's me, right? Like she looks like me. So to see that is just so much of it just resonated so hard. And I don't know, Mel, what that may have looked like for you in Disney Princess, and whether you even like Disney. I have vowed not to let my daughter, when I have her, watch princesses at all, because I was just not sure what that, like, also the message that comes behind being a princess and is weird to me, and monarchies and all of that. But because she was never going to find herself in that. So I don't know. I'd love to hear from you, Mel, if there was something that resonated with you, or if you've seen some of this stuff.
The trailer was beautiful. I was incensed at the white reaction to the trailer and all the weird negativity and the ridiculous things white people were saying, and do they even realize how racist they're being? They don't, and they won't recognize it. And it's really, really frustrating. It's really frustrating. I'm sure it's much more frustrating for y'all than it is for me. But, to your question, representation has never been a thought that has crossed my mind, because most Disney princesses look like me, right? White skin, blonde hair. It's always been that way. However, I can make another corollary. And I know, Monica, you mentioned that you love sci-fi. Is that right? Sci-fi and fantasy?
Yeah.
So I'm a big fantasy reader, and recently I discovered a series of books by a female author named Sarah Moss, and I had never read a woman writing fantasy, and the characters hit different. The female characters hit different. They're stronger. They're more complex. They're more heroic in so many ways, and I think that really helped me understand kind of this bridge to why representation matters in a genre that I love. So I think I can make some comparisons there for myself. Yeah. Monica, tell us about sci-fi and fantasy. You wanted us to ask you about this. So is this something that you're passionate about?
Yeah, so along with Little Mermaid, there's a Star Trek episode where Captain Kirk turns into a girl.
Oh, I didn't know about that. Really?
Yeah,
I used to watch Star Trek.
It's the original one. It's the original Star Trek.
Okay.
And it's actually one of been the last one too. So they go to this space outpost, and old flame he had rejected is there. She's got this machine, and she's trying to get back at him. And so somehow he fell out. She puts him on this machine, and they have like a spinning thing that goes around and around. Next thing you know, she's him and he's her.
Like a Freaky Friday sort of thing, like inhabiting each other's body. Wow.
Yeah, and so that's one thing, and then Lord of the Rings. So it's just different movies and stuff. Star Trek. I mean, for me, sci-fi gets such a vast imagination of what could be, like the Avengers, DC Comics. Like, wow, they're superheroes. So sometimes I really think that my superpower is being transgender. That's my superpower.
Yeah.
You know,
I love that.
actually good about that, you know. So, oh yeah, I'm stuck on DC Comics.
It's so funny because I did hear a TikToker talk about why it's so important to have representation in fantasy, because so much of fantasy is written from other people's pain and turmoil, right?
Yeah.
And having superpowers to overcome it. You know, even I think the Marvel comics in the 70s with so much of, you know, the Black Panther, right? He was Black Panther. That's what created Black Panther. But just to even because Black people can then imagine a world that doesn't feel as harsh as the one we're living in,
Exactly.
and to see ourselves. And I remember Whoopi Goldberg, who was in, I think, the Next Generation. Was she in Next Generation? I believe.
Yeah, she's in Next Generation. Yeah.
Talked about, and that's the one I actually watched a lot more when I was a kid. Was because she talked about why playing, taking on the torch from Nichelle Nichols in the original. The Next Generation was Black people being able to see themselves in the future because the present can be so harsh and disgusting for us.
Right.
And that thought of fantasy and the thought of futurism, there's even a scholarly body of work called Afrofuturism, because the now can be so damning and can be so heavy on us, that to see ourselves in fantasy and in the future and without all of these things is a place that Black people find themselves. This is why we have the term blurred Black nerds. I am not a fantasy person, but I do love Black Panther, and so that's the only movie I've seen in the movie theaters 3 times. That and Get Out. But just being able to see ourselves in that. I think there's also a new Quantum Leap coming out with an Asian American.
Yep, sure is.
To see that representation. So to hear you say that is that, and I love that you say being trans is your superpower, because I live that in my own identity as a Black woman. Like I recently said to someone that everything I do is because I'm a Black woman. Everything. So if I'm a gardener, it's because I'm a good Black woman gardener. If I'm an astrophysicist, it's because I'm a good Black astrophysicist. Because for me to be here, I came through other Black women, right? And that lives with me. And I had that conversation with my mom, and she was like, all of the people that we came through led me to be able to sit here and have some of these conversations. So I love that you said that being trans and being transgender is your superpower.
Oh yeah, I really do feel that way. I look at Star Trek, all these different fantasy things. I really do think that when they get mad at the other superheroes, they try to make laws against them. So they want make laws against the Avengers, laws against people who have these different superpowers. That's what that's about for me. Yeah, that's a superpower. But I will say that all the work we do now, though, is because of our ancestors who did the work.
Right.
So the fact that we are in this space where white guys are feeling decentered and other folks who've just been stupid and stuff like that, the church is going through this stuff, is because a lot of work has been done to get us here. You know, so I think that's really my hope, is that the work I do is built, like you were saying, that y'all on the ancestors who've done the work also.
Yeah, I was at a conference not too long ago, and somebody said it, and I wrote it down, and it's truly a post-it on my computer, and it says, I am both an ancestor and a descendant.
Yep.
Right. And I'm trying to create my good ancestorhood so that when I am Mufasa in the clouds to Simba, that I can be there and not, somewhere else, and that people can have looked up to me, that I was a light in somebody's life. Because I'm a descendant, but I'm also an ancestor. So this is what they, in Christianity, that middle passage, right? Like this is where we are, understanding that. So as we close out, are there any last things that you'd like? And Mel, I don't know if I'm stepping on your toes to ask if there's any last things that you'd like to put out, and some closing thoughts that you have about the work that you do, about your identity as a Black trans woman, or anything you would want our audience to know about you and your work and all of those things. I'm already putting on my list your next book. So, wait for that.
Hope is in doing. They say do the work. If you're not doing the work, then the question for me, am I being hopeful? No matter how hard and difficult the work might be, that's where my hope is. So it's, the more hopeful you are, the more you're going to do the work. It's not going to matter about someone else doing something. This is what you have to do, and this is where your hope is. Even no matter what. And I was pushed on that in a meeting one day. Like, why are you doing?
Hope is in the work.
Hope is in the work. Yeah.
That's amazing. Thank you for that. You are a superhero. No, really, I feel so inspired. And I feel grateful to you for shining your light so bright. You shine so bright in what you're doing. And I'm so thankful to learn from you and to cheer you on and to support you in any way I can. I think I speak for the whole show, everybody on the team, support you in any way we can.
Hold up her next book in our next.
Wow.
Yay.
So I hope that I can only do that work in this lane to make sure that I'm being a light the same way that you are, and being able to engage with you. So we thank you so much for sharing your precious time, because time is a precious commodity. We only get so much of it. So thank you for sharing your time with us.
Yes, absolutely.
Thank you. I enjoyed this. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Have a great day, everyone. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye.
Bye.